Now, in 2007, DNA testing of crime scene evidence excluded all 3 men and detected the DNA of another man who could not be identified. Advances in DNA technology since then could now identify the actual perpetrator. And in April of last year, the Arkansas Supreme Court, Damian Eccles, Jason Baldwin, and Jesse Miskelly, they said they can now request new DNA testing in the case, reversing a 2022 lower court ruling that denied Eccles' request.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you.
Listen to Pavarotti. Can I be your superhero?
Overnight, investigators telling our Tucson affiliate KVOA that a pair of black gloves were located in the search and have been submitted for DNA analysis.
Is that black glove something that belongs to an investigator who had already been through the area? Does it belong to somebody who is hiking? Does it belong to somebody who could be responsible for taking Nancy Guthrie out of their home? That's something that they want to work towards. When they talk about DNA, that also involves a national database, CODIS. They'll see if that has any sort of a tie back to somebody with a prior criminal record.
Hello, welcome to The Revealing. I am your host, Pavarotti, and I'm here to discuss the Idaho 4 case. And with all the new released court documents, yesterday I did a video and I covered some of them, and I realized that by just going through and covering them kind of quick like that, I do leave out a lot of the impact that can be made with this new information. And studying all this yesterday, I've come to the determination that it's better for me to focus on a few key things in these docs rather than just flying through them because there's something new. And, you know, a lot of times we try to, you know, at the best that we can, you know, kind of make levity of this situation and things around it because, you know, it's needed. Because I know a lot of us are emotionally invested in this case. And then we see things like, you know, potentially Bethany leaving that residence and them having evidence of it. I mean, something we've suspected for a long time. We knew that based on a lot of the evidence around this thing that they weren't there after that atrocity. I mean, we see the black Ford Explorer pull in at 429. We know they had contact with the roommates because we can hear it happening on the 1112 camera. So to think that they would have stayed there between then and that 911 call is ludicrous in itself. And being able to show proof of that is going to be really big. But in doing that, there's so many other aspects of this thing that really make me kind of sit back in my chair and remind myself that what we're dealing with here, as far as investigators, you know, the defense team, experts, I mean, what we're dealing with here is people, and people are fallible. And what's crazy is we have gone through with the microscopic things that have been released to us and picked them apart in so much detail for so long. I firmly believe now, especially after reading all of the new released documents yesterday, that we literally have a better grasp on certain things in this case than the prosecution team, the defense team, the experts. I mean, most of them. Now, they have access to a lot more information that we can't wait to get our hands on so that we can put the fine, detail of the final pieces of this thing together. But we've already done so much work. I can go through and I can see this stuff and go, whoa, this is what they thought. They weren't right. And I mean on both sides. So in this video, we're going to cover some of those key aspects. And this is more relating to Bryan Kohberger than anything, because once again, when we get released information, it's supposed to make us feel better about the situation around Bryan Kohberger. Yet every single release only adds to the pile of where is the evidence against Bryan Kohberger that you said you had, that you obviously don't. In yesterday's video, we talked about what the FBI was going to do with the cast. And you got to remember this. There is no cast on the night of the atrocity between 254 and 448. There isn't any. The only thing that they could have focused on was what happened before 254 and what happened after 448. There wasn't any other data in there. So when they talk about the drive testing and everything that's relevant to that, they're referring to the 23 prior trips and the trip the morning after, where Kohberger went to the ATM machine. They said he returned to the neighborhood. We now have video proof that he didn't return to the neighborhood. That was wrong. And instead of going through and giving all the detail, like Ann Taylor said in the hearing, that, hey, there's handoffs. You knew he wasn't at the house. What they tried to do was compile all that data from their CAS draft report and just summarize it in a CAS final report so that everybody didn't have their eyes on it. It's egregious. It's totally egregious, because it is those 23 prior trips that really bring the case together for them, because it certainly isn't the vehicle identification of the Hyundai Elantra, as we've proven over and over and over, that they were claiming a car that wasn't Bryan Kohberger's was Bryan Kohberger. I mean, it's unreal. It's unfathomable. Unfathomable. It's crazy. So, but what I'm going to do in this one is I'm not going to bore you to death. I'm going to give you some real information. And I'm going to start with some of the things that I read in these new docs that made me go, whoa, because we've already covered it. And it's just further verification of what we've already discussed. And there's two main things I'm going to focus on in this video. As you've seen in the opening, I gave you some examples of how DNA exonerated people and how they were using DNA here recently in a major case that was almost as big as the Kohberger case or the Idaho 4 case, as it related to evidence that they were using to try to figure out who a suspect was, right? They found a glove almost 2 miles from Nancy Guthrie's house that they have no idea who left the glove. Yet they were processing it for DNA evidence and entering it into CODIS. So that, coupled with what I think everybody has the mindset of, and it wrong on our side as well, because I hear people confirm it daily. And that is, they never, ever have said that it was Bryan Kohberger's DNA on the knife sheath. Everybody just assumes and concedes, well, yeah, that was his DNA on the sheath, but how did it get there? Did they plant it, or, was it transferred? I mean, how did his DNA get on that sheath? They've never said this is Bryan Kohberger's DNA, because they can't. All they've ever said is this DNA is 5.67 octillion times more likely to be Bryan Kohberger than an unrelated individual randomly selected from the population. That is not, this is Bryan Kohberger's DNA. That is, we've got a statistic here we're providing to say it's Bryan Kohberger's DNA. And as I've gone over many times, that statistical analysis is the prosecutor's fallacy. And here's something else I'm going to point out. I just ordered another K-bar knife. I just ordered another one from Amazon. I went ahead and opened this one for this video. That, and we're about to go fishing here the next couple of days, and I'm going to have this thing tied to my hip, but I just pulled it out of the Amazon package, and just so everybody can see, it is very consistent with the knife sheath that was found at the scenes. I know I've seen people, well, this isn't what happened. This isn't like the one ordered from Amazon. No, this thing is pretty close to the one that came from the scene. And this is fresh, new, out of the box, what it looks like. I wanted y'all to be the first to see it. Now, what does it look like when we take it off? I'm excited to see this myself. Are the indentions there? I'll hold it straight as I can. Look at that. It even creates more of a scraping on the leather up here than we seen in the photos. I don't see those indentions though. Is that an indention right there? No, there's no indentions on it. It just kind of scraped the leather right there. It's a pretty heavy thing, let me tell you. But it's this right here. Now, I made some observations in videos a few months ago, and that's why I ordered this particular knife sheath. Now, my kids who just graduated from college are supposed to be getting with some folks over at the college to complete my experiment. That's why I ordered another one, because I'm going to have one of these tested right from Amazon to see if it comes from the factory equipped with touch DNA, which I suspect that it does. And when I made those suggestions and I went through and I started talking about this aspect of the DNA, I said that the fact that this thing came from Olean, New York, and in all indications to me was it was brand new, because it looked brand new, and they filed search warrants for stores and distributors hoping to find one that was just sold. So it told me that that was likely a brand new sheath. And if it was brand new, then that means it just came from the factory. If they got it right and it was Amazon, then it would have come from the factory equipped with touch DNA already on it. And that's my hypothesis. I will, when I get the new one in and the kids finally get me with the DNA person at the college, I will get that experiment done. I'm going to try to do it on camera for you. But now that these new court docs have been released, I had to go ahead and do this. It is pretty heavy, I'll tell you. But I had to go ahead and do this. I'm going to put it back in here. Well, that button isn't easy to snap or unsnap, I'll tell you that. But once that new one gets in, I'll get with somebody with the DNA and I'll finish that test. I think it's very important. But as I went through the new court docs, something that was discussed absolutely confirmed beyond a shadow of a doubt my hypothesis, y'all. And so I'm going to go through and give you a brief description of why this is so important. And then I'm going to show you the confirmation of what I believed had happened related to this sheath being brand new. And it is a mind-blowing eye popper. Hold on to your seats. Hold on to your hats. Put your hands over your ears, because I don't want to blow your brains out your ears. Let's roll. Okay, so I've been trying to help people to understand this concept now for a while. And I know that, I got verification of it from somebody with a lot more experience than myself. And that's actually how I grasped the concept, was listening to Glitch DNA a while back. And when I finally understood, it hit me like a ton of bricks. But just to try to help you understand what I'm saying as it relates to this subject, you've got the world population, all right? Take the entire globe and all the people in it. It's estimated to be about 8.3 billion people in the world. Then you take the population of the United States of America, all 50 states, including Hawaii and Alaska. There's about 343 million people. Then you take the population of Pennsylvania, in the area that Bryan Kohberger grew up, going all the way up into the New York area where Olean, New York is, or Olean, New York, where the manufacturing plant for the K-bar knife is located, where everything ships out of. And we reduced that population to about 1.3 million people in this area. And I think it's just too much of a coincidence to say that when we reduce the entire world's population to about 1.3 million people in a certain area, and then you draw a circle, and in that area, you've got Bryan Kohberger's hometown, and in the same area, you've got the manufacturing plant for the K-bar knife. That just seems like a whole lot of geography for those two things to exist in at the same time. Then we bring in the aspect of this case that's different from almost every other case in history, and that is the use of forensic genetic genealogy or investigative genetic genealogy, the IgG, where they take a piece of evidence from a crime scene and they find trace DNA on this evidence of this knife sheath that is obviously brand new, according to what we thought. And then they take this and they start removing all of the information. They create a whole genome sequencing of the DNA on this sheath. And then in doing that, they remove all of the genetic markers from everybody in the world, everybody in the United States, and then they focus on people in this particular area right here that just happens to have similar genetic markers. And then they focus in a little bit more and they come up with a family tree of, we don't know how many people, but at the very least hundreds of people with this certain genetic markers. I mean, they have the same markers in this little area, this little family tree, in this little red box right here. They have certain genetic markers that everybody else in the country and the rest of the world seem to not have. And then based on that, the FBI looks at the people in this lineage and they select Bryan Kohberger out of that family lineage. And then they give Bryan Kohberger's name to the Moscow Police Department as a tip. Not as a match to the DNA, as we've learned through all of the court documents and court hearings in this case, but as a tip. And they said that tip came from the genetic genealogy and this family tree that they selected him from to provide to Moscow PD as this tip. Not that the DNA matched Kohberger, just that he was in this family lineage, they thought, and he was a likely candidate, so here's your tip. And then what happens? Then the Idaho State Police gets Bryan Kohberger's buccal swab. They then compare the buccal swab to the original DNA on the knife sheath. And then they create a statistic. But in the statistic that they create, they compare the match from Bryan Kohberger to the DNA on the sheath, and then they compare it to the global population, and that generates the statistic. 5 octillion to 1 that the DNA is the defendant's DNA rather than a random person selected from the general population of 8.3 billion. So in effect, what happened because of the use of IgG is they didn't do a organic investigation, find a suspect out of the general population, then compare his DNA to the DNA at the scene, and then compare a statistic that would have been equivalent to selecting a random person from the general population. No, what they did was take 8.3 billion people in the world and then slim it down to certain genetic markers from people in an area that's just a little bit bigger than the town where the K-bar knife sheath was manufactured. And then take that same DNA with all of those similar DNA markers and then compare it to a random person selected from the general population and get that statistic. Folks, that's what I'm trying to explain. That is what's called the prosecutor's fallacy. And the simple explanation for the prosecutor's fallacy is the math. A forensic test has a 1 in 1 million chance of creating a false positive, matching a random innocent person. 1 in 1 million. You might say, well, those odds are very high, and that's 1 in 1 million, that's nothing. But the fallacy is the prosecutor says there's only a 1 in a million chance the suspect is innocent. But the reality is, in a city of 10 million people, 10 innocent people would match the evidence. The suspect is just one of them. The error, it confuses probability of evidence given innocence with probability of innocence given evidence. That is the prosecutor's fallacy. But when you take this basic explanation of how false positives are generated in a statistic that's provided to determine if something is a match, and then you add anabolic steroids and you inject it with as much as you possibly can, then you get what happened in the Idaho 4 case. Because not only do you have the prosecutor's fallacy to deal with, you've eliminated almost 8.3 billion people from the population as being a potential match to the DNA before you ever even test the DNA against the general population or against the sample to generate that statistic. If you eliminate almost 8.3 billion people and you reduce it down to 1.3 million people in a certain area, that in and of itself would absolutely destroy the statistical analysis's validity. But to take it a step further and reduce it down to even more, to a few hundred or thousand people that share the same genetic markers, and then compare it to the DNA on the sheath and generate a statistic, you're generating a statistic based on the general population, a randomly selected individual, 8.3 billion people, and you've eliminated almost 8.3 billion people before you ever even perform the test. That is the crux of the matter. That is the reality of the situation, and I hope that's not clear as mud. It's a concept that's not easy to grasp, but once you do grasp it, you cannot ungrasp it. Now, ISP compares the DNA to the global population and generates a statistic that is totally infallible because you've eliminated the general population before you even tried to create that statistic. And then you couple that with the fact that that statistic is only focused on people in a certain geographical region that has a certain family lineage. And then you add the anomaly that the K-bar manufacturing plant happens to be in that specific vicinity. Now you've added an anomaly that is undeniably something that you have to be aware of. The only thing left in all of this calculation is, was that a new knife sheath or was it not? We now have confirmation. Because in these newly released documents, we have a claim from Brent Turvey, the defense expert in this case, and a response from Miss Sutton, the state's expert on crime scene recreation. And it is the most telling 2 paragraphs I've seen in this entire case. Number 1, the Turvey claim. A second reason Dr. Turvey feels that the sheath was staged. Number 2, the sheath was new and unused, as indicated by the absence of damage or wear to the leather. He confirms that knife sheath was brand new and unused. Sutton's response? Sutton will testify she is unsure why this proves that staging occurred. It could just as easily mean that the knife sheath was subjected to only light use in the past, or that it was purchased for this purpose. She absolutely confirms that this knife sheath was new and unused. It was a brand new sheath, which makes my hypothesis the most likely scenario in this entire thing. Confirmed. But what it tells me is they're all focused on different things that are not the most relevant things in this case. Instead of focusing in on the fact that that's a brand new sheath, the genetic genealogy, where it led. I mean, we're talking about reasonable doubt here, folks. And when you bring up reasonable doubt in a case where the only direct evidence, or no, there is no direct evidence, the only circumstantial evidence tying Bryan Kohberger to the entire case was the touch DNA on the knife sheath, That knife sheath is brand new. They focused an IgG to the area where the knife sheath was manufactured. I mean, down to a pinpoint in the whole globe, and then generated a statistical analysis based against the general population. That tells me that the defense team hadn't thought this out as well. So while they were focused on things that I would expect them to focus on, they missed so much in this case. And it's not their fault. They're humans. They're fallible. And it took me almost 2.5 years, 3 years to even put it together myself with the factory. But that's just one aspect of this thing. But when you talk about reasonable doubt, if that doesn't create enough reasonable doubt to take that one piece of evidence that ties the entire case together and throw it out, I don't know what would. Believing that, everything was just on the up and up and this piece of evidence just sealed the fate of Bryan Kohberger, give me a break. That is the crux of the matter with that. Now, the second thing that we're going to discuss, though, is what the egregiousness is around the other evidence that was found at this crime scene that I've been really harping on here lately. Because we know now that there was unknown male blood on the handrail in the midst of many other stains of blood from the crime scene, literally feet from where they found the victims, but more importantly, literally inches from where it appears one of the victims was actually attacked that nobody wants to acknowledge. That is the definition of a probative value of a piece of crime scene evidence. And the fact that it was blood and it was mixed with DNA from two other individuals, just because you cannot identify those individuals because the DNA counts were so low, does not change the fact that it was mixed with the blood of two other individuals. And you're not going to have a random event of somebody cutting their finger and leaving blood on a handrail and have two other people's DNA mixed in with it. That is ridiculous. That is a probative value in any calculation. Then you have blood on a glove outside. You want to say there's no probative value on that? Yet when you test the blood on that glove, it just doesn't match the other blood on the handrail that you already said wasn't probative, which is a oxymoron in itself. But the fact that there is more than one person's blood on the glove, and just because the DNA is so low you cannot figure out who that one other person's blood is, does not mean that that blood didn't come from the crime. In fact, a person with a glove that has their blood and somebody else's blood within feet of the front door of a quadruple unaliving with a knife is the most probative thing I can think of in the world. Then you have a fingerprint on the rear sliding door that doesn't match the perpetrator that was found in blood. And that is, in my book, 3 different individuals that had access to this crime scene, was likely involved in the crime, that you have not identified and you have not attempted to identify. You did match a lot of the people in this case. You tried to match them to all 3 of those. That's why I get so frustrated when people try to claim that Jack Showalter was one of the perps. Jack Showalter wasn't one of the perps. Jack Showalter had his DNA taken, his fingerprints, and he was highly investigated in this case. I'm not saying that he couldn't have played a role as far as hooking somebody up or giving information or watching victims. I mean, I think that's very well possible. But he wasn't one of the perpetrators in the crime. He didn't match the evidence that they had from the perpetrators. They were investigated. Jack DeCore was investigated highly. Connor Chestnut was investigated highly, along with Jack Showalter. If you watch the videos that I've done on those 2 for a long time, I feel like they may have had some ancillary involvement in this thing. But they weren't the ones that did it, and they were investigated and cleared from the evidence in the case. But the fact that they did not pursue the other evidence at all, I believe, tells you everything you need to know about this case. Because there's not an agency around that would take a risk on not investigating real evidence in a case to find people that they know would have been an active participant in the case, just to close the case and take a chance on them not doing the same thing in the future. Because if they did the same thing in the future, and then all of the information got out around them not following the leads properly, it would make them all look like tardos. And they're not in the business of looking like tardos. So that should tell you that they already had an idea who those other samples from this crime scene belong to. And the only reason we haven't heard about them is because they're not alive. That's the only commonsensical thing that you can grasp from this entire situation, in my humble opinion. But it's the egregiousness on the explanations of why these things were not pursued. And we now have even more egregiousness from these new court docs. Allow me to explain further. Anticipated rebuttal testimony from Katie White, formerly known as Katie Dace. In response to the defendant's expert disclosures, and in addition to previously disclosed testimony, the state may call Katie, formerly Dace, as an expert witness to respond, rebut, and testify as follows. What's she going to be testifying about? The Combined DNA Index System, CODIS, is a national collection of DNA profiles maintained by the FBI. It contains convicted offender profiles, arrestee profiles, as well as profiles obtained from evidence and can be used to identify a suspect, generate potential leads. Here's what it can be used for: to identify a suspect, generate potential leads, or link crime scenes together. Generate potential leads. That's not necessarily identifying a suspect, is it? Upon entry, profiles are automatically searched against the database and generate hits when a match occurs. In Idaho, individuals convicted of felonies and those placed on the SEX offender registry must be entered into CODIS. And then after 5 years, they can have all this reduced to traffic tickets. Idaho also allows for the entry of DNA profiles associated with unidentified human remains or living people unable to identify themselves. Idaho also allows for the entry of unidentified profiles generated from evidence associated with the crime, when that profile is believed to be from the putative perpetrator. Okay, well, that must be how you generate leads then, right? The profiles are entered by the reporting analyst and reviewed during technical review. And this is where Katie Dace comes in. Idaho State Police Forensic Services is required to follow the NDIS Operational Procedures Manual and abide by the MOU between the FBI and the Idaho State Police. Each state also has one CODIS administrator who is responsible for ensuring only approved profiles are entered. White is the state's CODIS administrator for Idaho. So what is White going to testify to? She is the state CODIS administrator. She's going to testify to approving what goes into CODIS and what doesn't go into CODIS based on her NDIS Operational Procedurals Manual, and she's going to abide by the MOU agreement between the FBI and the Idaho State Police. Let's check this NDIS Operational Procedurals Manual, though, first and see what the guidelines are on who goes into CODIS and who doesn't in a crime scene profile. And here we go. This is the extremely broad conditions from the NDIS manual. And it's 4.2.1.3. A forensic unknown, forensic mixture, or forensic partial DNA record submitted to NDIS shall originate from and or be associated with a crime scene, the source of which is attributable to a putative perpetrator. For purposes of NDIS eligibility, an item taken directly from a suspect shall not be considered a forensic sample. So the only guidelines, and they are extremely broad, is the source of which is attributable to a putative perpetrator shall originate from or be associated with the crime scene. I believe both of the samples that we talk about would easily fit this guideline. Would you agree? Goes on to say White agrees with the reporting analyst's decision not to enter the unknown profiles from male B and male D into CODIS, because those DNA samples were not eligible for entry into CODIS. They were not eligible for entry into CODIS. DNA profiles believed to be attributable to the putative perpetrator are eligible for entry into CODIS. DNA profiles attributable to victims, non-probative individuals, and items without an established link to the crime or crime scene are not allowed to be entered. Well, we looked at those broad guidelines, and for you to say that those two samples are not an established link to the crime or crime scene when it has multiple people's blood in each one of the samples is absolutely ridiculous. And I don't know how you can say it with a straight face, but you're agreeing with the reporting analyst decisions not to enter it into CODIS. Katie, that wasn't your decision, was it? And see, the problem with that is somebody other than the CODIS administrator must have made the decision not to enter the profiles into CODIS. And that is egregious in and of itself as I read these guidelines for the CODIS administrator. You backing up their reasons is not sufficient, in my humble opinion, based on your own NDIS operation procedures manual. Because the CODIS administrator has a lot of duties and they have to have a lot of requirements, training, as you see right here. They shall have successfully completed the software training sponsored by the FBI. I mean, this is all about all the training required for that CODIS administrator. She can designate an alternate CODIS administrator, but that is even more red tape. And it didn't say that an alternate CODIS administrator entered the information. It said what? It said a reporting analyst decision. So, as we go through and we look at all the roles here, CODIS administrator, they got to attend meetings and training continuously. Their general responsibilities, it gives a very detailed outline of what they are. And they have to notify CODIS of anything that's add, removed, or updated in the CODIS user information. They have all kinds of stuff here. Compliance with CODIS security, compliance with QAS standards. But one of their main roles is to upload profiles to SDIS and NDIS, schedule uploads from local laboratories, and review of CODIS-generated reports. So since she is the only one that is qualified in all of this to actually upload profiles to NDIS, then she should be the one making the decision on the front end, not the back end, of who goes in and what doesn't. And that is not what happened in this case. The laboratory must justify entry of every profile put into CODIS, and many factors can influence eligibility. For a large crime scene, not all locations within the scene are always weighted equally in probative value. It's very common to locate non-probative biological stains within residences due to everyday activities such as consensual sexual activity, small injuries, and lack of cleanliness. Evidence located closer to a point of entry, a disturbed area, or a victim will typically be considered of higher probative value than other areas. A disturbed area, it is literally in the midst of blood cast off all around it for unknown male B. The point of entry, the glove is just outside the front door. Or a victim, well, how about all of the blood that's scattered all over the living room where a victim was obviously attacked? Give me a break. And when you say all of this, you're forgetting now. Well, you're not forgetting now because it didn't happen then, but we have all new all new arrows in our quiver to be able to call this absolutely ridiculous. For this case, a knife sheath next to one of the victims produced an unknown male profile. The victims were believed to have been stabbed to death, and the sheath's proximity to the victim's body provided the strongest link to a potential perpetrator. The residence where the crime occurred is heavily trafficked by college students, and the location of the blood spot on the underside of a handrail, male B, does not in itself indicate a link to the crime. It does when it has somebody else's blood mixed in with it, two other people, and it's in the midst of blood cast off and in the midst of an area where somebody was obviously attacked. A gardening style glove located outside the residence in a publicly accessible area produced an additional unknown male profile. It produced an unknown male profile with an unknowns profile mixed in with it. Male D, no DNA attributable to the victims was located on this item, and a direct link to the crime could not be established. Had the DNA from one or more of the victims been located on this item, it would have been CODIS eligible. Well, there's two unknown people in male B that you can't identify that were obviously from the victims. There was another unknown profile in male D you couldn't identify that was likely from one of the victims. But all of this is absolutely ridiculous now that we know this.
Overnight, investigators telling our Tucson affiliate KVOA that a pair of black gloves were located in the search and have been submitted for DNA analysis.
Is that black glove something that belongs to an investigator who had already been through the area? Does it belong to somebody who is hiking? Does it belong to somebody who could be responsible for taking Nancy Guthrie out of their home? That's something that they want to work towards. When they talk about DNA, that also involves a national database, CODIS. They'll see if that has any sort of a tie back to somebody with a prior criminal record.
Generate potential leads. Now, she goes on to say, at the time, CODIS eligibility was determined. And you know what? You could have made that argument at that time because the public isn't quite as educated back then as they are today. But at this date and time, we know what can be entered into CODIS and what can't, and what's probative and what's not. And you're done. You're done now. Male DNA profiles A, B, and D were unidentified, and it was not possible for lab staff to know who would ultimately be linked to any one of the items. The CODIS eligibility determination was strictly made based on an evaluation of the probative value of each item. Yeah, right. So once again, it tells me that they didn't know which one of these they were going to hamper with the absolute sticking of the responsibility to this case. But in my humble opinion, it looks to me like they likely went with the one that was alive and not the ones that were deceased, because you know that they know whose blood was on that handrail and on that glove, because Ann Taylor even asked Rylene Nolan if she could determine if people matched samples in the lab without creating a statistic, and she agreed that she could. And I think that is clear indication that they knew whose DNA was on that glove and on that handrail, but they wanted to go with the person they could find that was alive, and they went with that little trace DNA on the knife sheath that was a brand new knife sheath that just happens to have been found through genetic genealogy, zeroed in on the factory that actually shipped the knife sheath out, and then created a statistic matching it against the general population, and then arrested Bryan Kohberger. And I'm sure that he's still sitting there to this day wondering what the heck has happened to him. I'm sure there's still people out there to this day waiting on the other shoe to drop, waiting for that evidence that they have against Bryan Kohberger to be released. Folks, it's never going to happen. I mean, good grief. After all this time, with every new release, not only does it not point to Bryan Kohberger, it continues to prove that they absolutely have just plucked this guy up and shoved him in a jail cell. When I look at other things, I've got so much to bring you with these new release court docs, but I'm going to bring them like I brought in this video so that they have the proper impact. It is absolutely mind-blowing, some of the things that they were going to actually go to trial with. That's how I know. See people, well, but nothing's happening, Pav. When you look at a leak investigation issued by a special prosecutor, I looked at the average time frames for them to complete an investigation such as that, and it's a year. It's a year. All right, so he was initiated back before July. It's several months away from July, so it takes a year for them to complete an investigation on average. But here's the thing. People say, well, yeah, but this will take 5 years post-conviction relief. What you're not taking into consideration as it relates to the leak is the judge ordered a special prosecutor in the midst of pretrial hearings to investigate a likely state leak of information that would have a big impact on a case. That has no precedent. Never been done that I can find in a case such as this, in a criminal case against an individual that was accused of a crime such as this right before trial. It's never happened. So when you have something like this that's that big, that's never happened, and we're waiting for that investigation to complete, and we have verification, it's ongoing right now. Once it's complete, regardless of what it finds, there is going to be things that are filed, and they will have to be taken into consideration because of the magnitude of the circumstances around them. And being that it has no precedence in the past, it's about to have precedence in the present. This thing is far from over, but there's so many more arrows in the quiver that defense team is going to have going into this that they didn't have, and I can assure you of that it is a foregone conclusion. So Pav will keep on paving on until this thing is done. Please like and subscribe to this channel. Post your comments, your thoughts, your criticisms. Let's hope that they don't release any cannibals up there in Idaho anytime soon, because they seem to have a propensity to give leniency to cannibals. Cannibals! Pav's out.
Oh, gonna give it a shot. Only one of me to shield you all from the enemy. You're a superhero. You're a superhero.